Thank you, everybody, for being here today. I recognize some faces, but there's lots of new ones, and that's exciting for me to share a little bit about some of the work that's been going on. I'd like to start by acknowledging Christine Lindquist, who's now moved on, but she's over there. She and I do all this work together, and I'm just the one who drew the short straw and got to get up in front of you today. We're at RTI International, which is a nonprofit research organization dedicated to conducting research that improves the human condition. And we're very proud of the work we've conducted in this area of sexual assault among college populations, and most certainly this recent work that we've done, and we're very happy to be here to tell you a bit about it. For many decades, some very good researchers and scientists have been conducting research on sexual assault among college populations, and we're just part of that group. But this most recent work is something that we think really advances the field. We did some work for the National Institute of Justice years ago that had some impact on the field. Notably, it produced the statistic that 1 in 5 women will be sexually assaulted while in college. Although we're really happy about that statistic being used in bringing attention to the issue, we certainly never intended it for it to be used as a national estimate. And in fact, we've never seen much merit or value in creating a national estimate. We think schools need data that represents their populations so they can address them specifically and effectively. So we were very excited in 2014 when the White House Task Force to Protect Students from Sexual Assault was formed, and we were contacted by the Office of Violence Against Women and the Bureau of Justice Statistics to conduct some additional work in this area, and that led to the Campus Climate Survey Validation Study that I'm going to be telling you about. There's lots of details that I can share, and they're in our 400+ page report on the BJS website, but I'm going to try to give you a top of the trees overview of our methodology and our results, and then talk a bit about prevention and some of the things that's going on in that area. We designed a survey instrument that was extremely brief. It's a web-based instrument that took about 15 minutes for college students to complete. It was a self-administered web survey, functional on a variety of devices. About a third of our respondents took the survey on a smartphone. We optimized it for that, and we think that was important. We take a behaviorally specific two-stage approach to measuring sexual assault. Behaviorally specific simply means that we don't use terms like rape and sexual assault because those are legal terms and not universally understood by college students. So instead, we use explicit behavioral language to describe what sexual contact means, define unwanted sexual contact for them, and then ask them a series of questions to measure the prevalence of sexual assault. Our primary reference period was since the beginning of the academic year, the 2014-2015 academic year. We collected our data in the spring of 2015. But we did also ask questions about since entering college and in their lifetime. We have a broad array of campus climate measures. We didn't call it the campus climate survey because we learned that when you call it that, college students think you can ask them about weather or climate change. We call it the college experiences survey when in the field. And importantly, we embedded a lot of validity checks and did something called latent class analysis to confirm that the data we collected were not only representative of the samples we collected them from, but also accurate in terms of estimating the prevalence and nature of sexual assault. We ultimately collected data from students at 9 schools. Again, not a nationally representative sample of schools, but we did have variation in terms of the size of the schools, 2-year versus 4-year schools, public versus private, and then geographically. We offered a survey incentive. We paid everyone who completed the survey a $25 gift card. We kept the survey open for about 57 days on average at the 9 schools. And at the end, they could access support services at their school, local community, state, and federal, should they need any services or resources to help them with coping with their victimization experiences. As I said, we called it the College Experiences Survey in the field. Here are some of the topics we covered. In addition to sexual assault victimization, we did measure sexual harassment, coerced sexual contact, intimate partner violence. We attempted to measure perpetration of sexual harassment and sexual assault, but failed at doing so. We can talk about that if you're interested. And as I said, we had a broad array of campus climate measures that got at the environment on campus, the culture on campus, the extent to which negative attitudes towards women or negative disparaging jokes are tolerated about women, things like that, how the leadership was perceived in handling sexual assault. Lots of measures that help us describe the culture and environment climate on campus as it relates to harassment and assault. One of the things we were very pleased about were the response rates we achieved. So the horizontal blue line represents the 54% of undergraduate women who completed the survey. The orange horizontal line is that 40% of undergraduate men completed the survey, but there's a lot of variation across schools. One school had a 71% response rate among women and a 60% response rate among men. We collected 23,000 completed surveys in those 57 days, about 15,000 undergraduate women and about 8,000 men. We also conducted a non-response bias analysis to make sure the samples of students that we recruited to participate were similar and in most cases identical to those who did not complete the survey. We did notice some differences on things like year of study. Freshmen were more likely to complete the survey than upperclassmen, and we weighted the data to adjust for those differences. Now I'm going to show you a slide that's got a lot of dots on them and some numbers, but I'll walk you through what they all mean. First of all, the red dots represent the prevalence of sexual assault during the academic year, so about roughly a 7 to 8 month reference period. On the far right is the average, so 10.3% of undergraduate women experienced a completed sexual assault during the academic year. As I said before, we think average statistics aren't very interesting or useful, so let's talk about the variation across schools. On the far left, I won't be naming any of the schools, we never do. We've just given the numbers here. We have a school that has a prevalence for sexual assault that's under 5%, the red dot. On the far right, before the average, you see that we also have a school where the prevalence of sexual assault during the academic year was 20%. And then we have everything in between. Sexual assault is our umbrella term, meaning that they experienced unwanted sexual contact. But we're also able to, with subsequent questions, collect data on the nature of the sexual contact. So if it involved forced kissing or grabbing of sexual body parts, we call it sexual battery, and that's represented here in the green dots. If it involved penetration, we call it rape. It was unwanted sexual contact that involved sexual penetration, and it constitutes rape. And here again, you see the average, 6% experienced sexual battery during the academic year, 4% experienced rape, but you see variation across the schools. And it's this variation that we think is critical. You know, if I'm a police chief in Raleigh, North Carolina, a national homicide rate doesn't tell me anything about the problem of homicide in my community. Similarly, the average for this, or 1 in 5, if I'm a president of a university, doesn't tell me anything about the prevalence or nature of the problem among my students. What we set out to do was create school-specific estimates that we could then share with the university, which we did, and we think that understanding is what schools need to understand how to address this problem effectively. One of the things we're able to do is document when these things happen. So we ask people about the incidents. Here's just a graphic that shows the number of sexual assaults that occur by month, by year of study. The blue bars represent first-year students or freshman women. And you can see that September and October, often referred to as the red zone, is the time during which the most sexual assaults occur for freshman women. Not surprising, but our data certainly confirmed what previous studies have found. Something we did that we were somewhat reluctant to do, or at least I was somewhat reluctant to do, was to compare our data to an external source. It's something you often can't do or don't do with rape and sexual assault data simply because it's the most underreported crime in the world. But someone wanted us to do it and we tried it. So we looked within our survey data, and when we weighted our samples up to represent the entire populations of these 9 schools, we found that our survey respondents told us about a total of 2,380 rapes that occurred during the academic year at these 9 schools. 770 of those occurred on campus. Only 170 of them were reported to authorities at that school who would have been required to report those rapes to the federal government under the Clery Act. Most of you probably know what the Clery Act is, but it essentially requires universities to notify the federal government when certain crimes occur. In this case, we're subsetting the data on rape that occurred on campus and were reported to certain school authorities. And when you look for common cases within our data, we find that 60 rapes in our data out of the 2,380 occurred on campus and were reported to appropriate school authorities and therefore should have been reported under the Clery Act. So we decided to compare that to how many were actually reported under the Clery Act for these 9 schools, 40. And that number 60 is a survey estimate, so it has a confidence interval around it, and in this case can't be distinguished statistically from 40. So there's 3 takeaways from this finding. 1, if you think our survey exercise is useless or not valid, but you like Clery Act data, our survey data actually look pretty good. Or if you think Clery Act data are probably flawed and underreported and don't represent anything that approaches reality, our survey data actually make the Clery Act data for these 9 schools look pretty good. But of course the key takeaway is that if you're using Clery Act data or law enforcement data or any official statistic to estimate the magnitude of this problem, you'll be dramatically underestimating how big of a problem it is. So, a couple key takeaways related to our methodology. We think school-specific results are critical. As I said, it doesn't help to have a number like 1 in 5. You need to understand the nature of the problem among your students. We think a standardized approach like we used is useful because it allows for comparison across schools. And if we were able to include a lot more schools in something like this, we'd be able to answer a key question, which you probably all want to ask, which is why did some schools have higher rates than others? With only 9 schools, we can't answer that. It'd be nice to be able to one day. It's an incredibly cost-effective methodology. We collected these data for less than $40 per completed survey, and 25 of that was the cost of the survey incentive. Compared to lots of other data collections, it's an incredibly efficient methodology. We think incentives are important. They're expensive, but they're important because they drive response rates, sample representativeness, and data quality. We think the survey needs to be fielded for at least 30 days. Some of these climate surveys have been going out for 1 week or 2 weeks, and we know from our data that had we done that, we would have come in here with very different and unstable, and I think not very valid estimates. And only by collecting lots of these data using rigorous methods do we think we can really start to inform policy and practice and prevention to some extent to the point that we need to if we want to effectively address this problem. So some good news takeaways from our work is that we think we have an instrument and a cost-effective methodology for collecting lots of data quickly that can be used to inform policy and practice. And lastly, I just want to mention a couple prevention programs that we think are also showing promise. First, I'll mention the Green Dot program, which was developed at the University of Kentucky by some very good researchers. This is a bystander intervention, which of course takes the approach that we are all responsible for addressing and preventing sexual assault if we're given the opportunity to do so. It involves a 50-minute motivational speech given to classrooms. It also involves an intensive bystander training with smaller groups of students, total of about 4 to 6 hours of programming. And in some evaluations, they've seen some pretty solid reductions in things like unwanted sexual experiences, having sex when you're too drunk to consent, sexual harassment victimization, sexual harassment perpetration, stalking, victimization and perpetration, and psychological dating violence. And it's been published in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine. Another program that we think is showing promise is called the Enhanced Assess, Acknowledge, Act, or EAAA program. This was developed by Charlene Sin at the University of Windsor. There's some language about, this is more of a risk reduction program. It involves women in a very intensive curriculum, and both of the line charts that are supposed to appear there don't. But I can tell you that in a fairly rigorous evaluation, they were able to show a 46% reduction in completed rate 1 year out from participating in the intervention, and a 63% reduction in attempted rate in a rigorous evaluation published in the New England Journal of Medicine. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Just open it up for about 5 minutes for questions.
This was wonderful. It's really very powerful stuff. Are there any plans and funding available to use this survey among universities? Universities come forward and ask you if they could use it. What's the status in your future?
That's a great question. So first of all, the federal government, your tax dollars paid for the development for this work and the development of the instrument and the methodology. We have put that out. It's been put out on the it was on the White House website. It's on the Office of Violence Against Violence Against Women website as a best practice. Former Vice President Biden talked about it a couple weeks ago in his last address to the task force and promoted it as a best practice. So our instrument and a description of our methodology is out there for anyone to use. That said, not all schools have the capabilities to necessarily do that, and schools have been coming directly to us and asking us to do this on their behalf, which we're happy to do. We just have to figure out what that statement of work looks like and what it's going to cost, and frankly, some of them can afford that and they're paying for that, and some of them can't. There's still the possibility of federal legislation that would call for and partially fund or fully fund additional survey work of this kind. It's anybody's guess what the fate of that legislation will be. Some people are probably more optimistic than others. But we also think there's foundation funding as a possibility. Vice President Biden has launched his foundation, I think as of today or yesterday, and certainly this is a focus for him. So we don't know where this is going to go, but we're certainly hoping it continues in some fashion or form.
Review, just one quick follow-up. You have are you able to, if a school does this, they send you the data electronically? Have you developed a way to analyze and prepare a report from the school?
We haven't been asked to do that. I suppose we could. Certainly, I think the survey instrument is one piece of this, but so is the methodology. And I think before we analyze anyone else's data and drew any conclusions from it, we'd want to make sure that it ticks some of the boxes that we think are important. Other climate surveys have been done that haven't gone very well, with extremely low response rates, biased samples. I mean, I saw a letter from one university president that said, we paid $85,000, essentially said, we paid $85,000 to participate in the survey, only 9% of you responded to it, so we don't think the data mean anything. That would be a shame. So I think we would have some expectations methodologically that we hope could be hit, and some schools I think have done a good job with this. We could analyze data certainly of our survey instrument and have a routinized process for doing that, but they would have to be collected in a certain way. Yes?
I just have a quick question. I wasn't able to see if you had the survey up there now without breaking my neck, but is this survey able to be implemented like per school, like School of Law, School of Business, to kind of get a more feel for it?
Yes, it all comes down to statistical power, but the study I've been talking to you about today was done with only undergraduate students, but we conducted this study this past spring at a school, and we included both professional and graduate students. And when you can collect enough data from a given group, say law students, business school students, such that you can make a statistical estimate that is sufficiently precise or within your desired margin of error, you can actually make prevalence estimates for subgroups. And we're doing that by race, ethnicity, sexual minority status, things like that, whenever there's enough students and enough respondents to allow us to do so responsibly.
I think if I heard you correctly, you said with the perpetration data, collecting that data, there were some challenges. Can you talk about that?
We were encouraged to try to measure perpetration, and we were happy to try to do it. We tried to do it in our campus sexual assault studies funded by NIJ a decade earlier. Just to be totally blunt, we didn't think they passed the sniff test. When men and women report perpetrating sexual harassment and sexual assault at the same rates, very low single-digit percentages, those data are difficult to believe, and there's lots of reasons why someone might not be willing to answer our questions honestly, I would think, and I think the data bore that out. We would love measuring perpetration accurately, and there's certainly been lots of attempts to do it, and I think some have done it better than others. Measuring perpetration accurately is the holy grail. I don't think we're there, or anywhere close in my opinion.
We have time for one more question.
Yes?
With the evidence-based programs, Green Dot and EAAA, are there others that actually look at risk reduction by addressing the potential or actual behavior of alleged perpetrators versus requiring victims and bystanders to step up?
So, certainly, and I don't mean to single out only these two and say these are the only programs. I mean, there's a program called Men Can Stop
Yes,
Rape.
sure.
There's other interventions that are targeting men who obviously I think are the majority of perpetrators. And certainly prevention starts with them. But quite frankly, I think the evidence base for those is still limited. And part of that's just because evaluating programs, when an outcome like this is the needle you want to move, so to speak, on measurement, evaluating programs is just a very challenging thing and not something that we've had enough funding or time to get done well.
Great, thank you. We're
Thank you.
going to our next speaker.